Jumping in, I guess we'll start with this building here, and that is Karma, and that's, as Uni mentioned, that's Stanford Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, and it's one of the places that's, well, it's centered to the topics that I want to address in this presentation. It really kind of holds a lot of things together, and it's of course where Uni graduated from, and it's as well as Kyoku and Hongchen has been a visiting researcher and will be with us at Karma as well onwards. And I'm currently there as an assistant professor, and it's a really wonderful place in the nexus for computer research that combines music, cognition, music information retrieval, signal processing, computer science, and many other disciplines. And it's really this combination that I've tried to embrace in the work that I do. And I hope to tell you about some of these. On the ground, in the steps leading up to Karma, you'll see these domes, which are really salibles, which I'll tell you about a little later. These became the salable speaker arrays in the Stanford Laptop Orchestra. Next slide, please. Going back some time, that was a present day picture of Karma, but this is the IBM 360. And this is for a computer from what I'd like to think of as kind of the age of mainframes in the early 70s. And this is actually one of the first computers, well, kind of ever, at least certainly for kind of business and, you know, as computers were just kind of being discovered in terms of what their capabilities are. And one, of course, is for music and sound. And of course, their attractiveness has always been their precision and their ability to specify algorithms to synthesize sound, and more recently to actually analyze them and make sense of them. So, and this machine, of course, is one of the machines that have actually been used for music making. Of course, back in the day, it really took a long time to create a piece of music with a computer. You'd have to program it, perhaps in a punch card, submit it to your local computing center. If you were lucky enough to have access to one, it cost a lot of money per hour to actually do this. And the turnaround time for actually receiving the sound back is something like maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And then that's kind of the length of the iteration cycle. But yet people still experimented with this machine because the power and the potential that computers offered for music. Of course, today I think we're very lucky as computers have gotten much more powerful in terms of how much processing they can do and how much data they can hold, both in memory as well as in more permanent storage. If we go to the next slide, we'll see actually what I worked on at Princeton. One of the things I worked on at Princeton was the Chuck programming language. And this, in contrast, really tries to take advantage of today's programming, or today's computers, for rapid turnaround. So instead of waiting, say, days or a few weeks to actually hear a sound, Chuck actually embraces kind of this on-the-fly programming, which really is the idea is you would actually program and run the program as you go, so that it really takes on the order of seconds, or even less sometimes, to hear what a particular piece of code actually does. If you go to the next slide, we'll see then actually one of the places that Chuck was used in while I was at Princeton, that's the Princeton Laptop Orchestra. And here you will see a group of not only laptops, but also humans, as well as these dome speakers you see kind of on the ground, these black hemispherical things. Those are speaker arrays meant to model each laptop instrument more like a traditional instrument with its own, you know, radiation patterns, or at least something that isn't going through a mixer and coming out of a PA system around you. The sound's coming from the laptop or near the laptop or the instrument itself. To the next slide, please. So now we're actually back at Karma, and that's a really quick and jumpy history of kind of how we're arriving and some of the things we're arriving today. And here we actually go back to the salibles and remember the hemispheres, and this is where we actually started adopting that idea from the Princeton Laptop Orchestra to then the Stanford Laptop Orchestra. Next slide. Here's a picture of us actually doing one last subversion checkout on our way to a concert right outside of Karma. Next slide. And here are the salable speaker arrays we ended up building. This was actually made out of IKEA salables, car speaker drivers, compact amplifiers inside, and the little T-shaped thing you see on the right of each speaker is actually a little handle. That's actually a drawer handle we got from Home Depot, which is basically something that goes on some furniture. In this case, we put it on the speaker array to carry them around. So all of these things are basically homemade commodity parts. Next slide. So I guess I'll take you really quickly through the things that went into building these speaker arrays. And the idea of the speaker array, before I actually show you how we made them, is that, of course, the sound comes from the speaker array and it radiates outwards, rather than, kind of the loudspeaker model of, say, a stereo, quad, 8-channel or 16-channel or more kind of speaker that surrounds you. This is meant to radiate from inside out. The idea is that if you play like an instrument, like a violin, the sound doesn't come from around you, it comes from the artifact. So here's actually how we made some of these salables at Stanford, or these speaker arrays at Stanford. So we started with this wooden salable. This is an 11-inch bowl used for making salad. And we got it from IKEA. I think it's called Blanda Mat. That's the IKEA name. The next step, next slide please, is to turn it upside down. It's a pretty important step, as this will enable us. This is actually the configuration we're going to put them on the ground with. Next slide. We then drill holes in them, 6 holes per. Next slide. And then we find base plates. We cut them, route them, smooth them out, and get them ready to be attached to the enclosures themselves. Keep going. Next slide. And then we add speakers, not 1, but 6, as we'll see in the next slide. And that's how many actually go into the speaker arrays. Each of these are actually just 4-inch Infinity car stereo drivers. And next slide. These are driven by amplifiers. You see here, there's actually a stack of 3. These are the Sonic Impact Generation 2 T-amps. They're efficient, they're inexpensive, and they sound pretty good. We basically ripped a couple apart, modified them a little bit, and stacked 3 stereo pairs together, and these actually comprise the heart of the what's driving the drivers in the speaker arrays. Next slide, please. And of course, we had to make a lot of them. Next slide. And fortunately, we had a great group of people that worked on this. These were, among them are these folks, which are the 2007-2008 group of music science and technology master students. And we worked very hard during spring break. Here's the Max Lab at Karma, where we prototype a lot of different things. And then to all of this, we're actually adding things like the laptop, which you see in the next slide here. Next slide, please. Next slide. And an audio interface. This is what gives us kind of the multi-channel capabilities. Next slide. To pillows and mats. We don't really sit on tables, but we sit near to the ground. Next slide. And here's a breakfast tray from IKEA. We have a lot of stuff from IKEA, and this is actually what we put the laptop on. And next slide, please. We chain them up with power, and basically those run all through the ensemble. Next slide. To networking that connect all the computers via wireless or sometimes wired Ethernet. Next slide, please. This is a power conditioner to smooth out the power. I have 2 or 3 of these, basically 1 for every circuit. The rest of the power we daisy chain together. Next slide. And to that we add musical interfaces, as well as gaming interfaces, which you see on the next slide. So all of these put together, you have a laptop orchestra. Next slide. And this is one of the stations there. So when it's all put together, you have laptop sitting on top of an audio interface on a table, and the human sits on the pillows in the mat, sometimes in lotus position, and the speaker array sitting to the left. And we multiply that by 20, you have a laptop orchestra. Next slide, please. And here you see the laptop orchestra on stage with the Stanford New Ensemble playing with musicians in China in 2008. And this is enabled by another research initiative at Karma called Soundwire. Soundwire is led by Chris Chave. He's the director of Karma, and the idea is that it's for sending high quality multi-channel audio over internet for live musical performance, and it worked really well in this case. And it's actually one of the debut concerts of the Laptop Orchestra. It was actually quite a lot of fun. Also very nerve-wracking to put together one of these concerts, but in the end, it was all worth it. Next slide, please. So we do everything with laptops. In this case, we're simply using the tilt sensors inside the laptop to perform and to use that to control sounds. Next slide, please. And here's a picture of actually the networking, the wireless hub. I had to put that in a tree because when we performed outside in the sculpture gardens, all the computers are so far away from each other that when this thing was on the ground, we could not get direct line of sight to other computers, so we're losing a lot of packets when we try to network and synchronize the computers for music. So it turned out teaching assistant was really good at climbing trees, and he actually put this up high up on a branch, and that solved all our problems. Next slide, please. More pictures of performers, very colorful shirts. Next slide. Do segues. Steve Wozniak, along with Steve Jobs, actually was the co-founder of Apple back in the day. He actually came to these concerts with his entourage riding in on segways, and it's actually one of the perks, I guess, of really performing crazy computer music in Silicon Valley. You just never know who shows up. Next slide, please. And then in addition to a research platform, the Laptop Orchestra is also a classroom. So it's actually now a class both in music at Karma as well as a cross-listed course in computer science. And the course really deals with everything from programming to sound design to composition to live performance, all in kind of one interdisciplinary setting.